Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and it's an honor to have as our guest this morning Dr. Peter Breggin. Dr. Breggin is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, former full-time researcher for NIMH, and now in private practice in Ithaca, New York. He's the author of more than 20 books, most recently on psychiatric drug withdrawal, a guidebook for prescribers, therapists, patients, and their families. Also author of Medication Madness, the Role of Psychiatric Drugs in Cases of Violence, Suicide, and Crime. He has radio shows. He does. You can't believe how many things Dr. Breggin does. We'll put them all, of course, on the website and link to the podcast. So, Peter, I noticed the other day that the New York Times seemed to be chortling over, isn't it wonderful? They're diagnosing so many more little boys, especially with attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity and disorder and all those various things whose names I'm forgetting. They also mentioned, so this is going to be a big step up in prescriptions.
Yeah, there's been a huge change. Before I get into that, I just realized that I would love to mention to your audience that we have our conference coming up at the end of this month. May I do that for a minute?
Yes, please.
And it's very relevant to the children's issues. It's now the third conference of the Empathic Therapy Center. That's our nonprofit, 501c3. It's a good, solid organization. We have about 70 or 80 marvelous people on the advisory council. And we're going to be meeting again in Syracuse, New York, and the public is welcome. Families, parents, just people who are interested, professionals of all kinds are welcome. It's April 26th through the 28th in Syracuse, New York. You can get to it, get all the information you need, including getting rooms, at empathictherapy.org. We really try to make it inexpensive and provide a lot of meals. We have fabulous speakers, although we have covering a wide range on the critical side of the criticism of current psychiatry. We have a family court judge coming in from Florida to talk about her work with children and families. We have a lawyer, Corporal Till, who does malpractice, has cases where children have committed suicide that he's been involved in. He's a very caring, lovely man. We have Steve Scheller, who does these huge government cases where, the drug companies end up having to pay millions and even billions of dollars to the government. He really knows a lot about the damage done by psychiatric drugs. He's on the cutting edge of it. Still on the critical edge, we have a panel that deals with people who have survived or lost family members after psychiatric drugs. I'll be doing some general critical stuff. And then we have a ton of positive stuff. I'm doing a big, long, really get into the nitty-gritty of therapy and life with a wonderful psychologist, Bert Karen. We're sort of two elder statesmen of psychiatry and psychology, just sharing with the audience and interacting with the audience about issues in psychology, psychiatry, and life. And we have Howie Glasser, who's going to do a presentation in a film on the nurtured heart approach to helping children and families. So we've got a lot of wonderful stuff going on. And again, people can find out about the conference at empathictherapy.org. And thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about that.
No, Peter, that's wonderful. It sounds like something much needed on this podcast on the webpage. We'll direct people to empathictherapy.org as well.
Hey, thank you. Well, going back to your question, I'm glad you brought it up. It's such an important issue. There's two things that are so interesting about the New York Times article, which describes the findings from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. They have this incredible line in the middle of it all, and very near the top of the page. It talks about Ritalin and Adderall and other stimulants, quote, which can drastically improve the lives of those with ADHD. Where do they get that from? There's nothing in the CDC that says that. The federal government just got through sponsoring a multi-million-dollar, multiple-year study of giving stimulants to children and found that it was no better than going to a summer camp once and confirmed that the kids are getting a stunting of height and growth, which is a very serious matter. It relates to overall growth because it relates to disruption of growth hormone. So, we've got additional warnings now on cardiac and problems and psychosis from these drugs. They cause depression in a large number of people. And it's worth reading to just show you how the mass media handles this kind of thing. They're talking about a recent CDC survey in which 11% of school-aged children have received a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. 11% of all school-aged children. That's 2 to 17. The number includes little tiny kids. And then there's another number that is hair-raising, which is that 19% of boys, 14 to 17, will be diagnosed with ADHD. That's 2 in 10, 20% basically, will be diagnosed with ADHD. Here's the quote. About 2/3 of those with a current diagnosis receive prescriptions for stimulants like Ritalin or Adderall, which can drastically improve the lives of those with ADHD, but can also lead to addiction, anxiety, and occasionally psychosis.
Yeah.
Not to mention depression, and then not to mention suppression of height and weight and God knows what else by screwing up growth hormone. So it's such an odd word, drastically improve. And drastically is usually used for something bad. Drastically improve the lives of those with ADHD. Well, folks, it's just untrue. After so many years of trying, the only thing that can be shown that these drugs do is to suppress spontaneous behavior and increase compulsivity in children for about 4 weeks before the brain starts fighting back. So let me just say it again. All we have been able to demonstrate scientifically is that while the drug is having its maximum effect before the brain adapts, which is about 4 weeks or so, it will suppress overall spontaneous behavior and it will increase obsessive behavior. And we have elegant chimpanzee studies. By the way, I have a summary of a lot of this latest data about how bad the drugs are in the first half of my book, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, and then the second half is about withdrawing. But if you give these drugs to normal chimps, chimps are very much like young children. They like to play. They like to hug and kiss. They have usually not very violent conflicts. They have little gangs with leaders. They're very busy. They want to explore. They're very intelligent. They want to find out stuff. Now, if you give these drugs to free-ranging chimps in a free-ranging situation, not really free-ranging, but, not in a larger confinement where they can behave like chimps, it levels all spontaneous behavior. So they stop socializing, they stop grooming, they stop smiling, and they stop their little hierarchies. They stop their social interactions. It's relative, to some extent to dose, but a clinical dose for kids, pound for pound, will do this to chimps. And then it increases obsessive behavior. So they'll pick at their skin instead of grooming somebody else. They'll chew on bars aimlessly or play with pebbles or stare outside the cage if they're in a cage. And again, the cage ones will chew on bars and do those kinds of things. So they become better caged animals. They look like they're content to do nothing meaningful in a cage. And that's what we're doing to our kids with these drugs. And now we're doing it in the most targeted age group, 14 to 17-year-olds. About 20% are getting diagnosed with ADHD, and the large portion of them, of course, on drugs. That's not even counting the kids who are on all these other drugs. The great numbers are diagnosed bipolar or depressed or OCD. And the pattern you see with these children is that they don't just stay on ADHD drugs because, let's say, the first thing that happens is the drug is overstimulating them, so they're not sleeping at night. So then they get put on maybe clonidine, which is a very serious heart risk, in combination with the stimulants. They get put on clonidine very wrongfully for sleep, or they get put on a mood stabilizer to help them sleep or quiet down at night. And, of course, the combination of drugs is going to cause more adverse effects. They'll get put on an antidepressant. And we know from the whole range of studies that 50% or more of children put on antidepressants will get some degree of out-of-control behavior, some degree of disturbed behavior. Huge percentage of the kids. And again, I cite these studies in Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. So we're just really harming a whole generation. And I could go on. I'm going to take a breath and give you a chance. But, I mean, there's all the moral and social implications of this are just drastic. I think it's pharmaceutical company-induced childhood. Pharmaceutical companies and psychiatry in the lead.
And so here you have these children at a stage of life where their brain is growing. and you're putting them on a neurological drug. Do those questions even come up, except, of course, for people like you? Are they ever addressed? I mean, for my certainly public school teachers who are at the front lines of putting the pressure on the parents to go on these drugs, certainly never mention them. And
these issues are hardly ever addressed. I'm sure there isn't hardly a pediatrician in the country who uses these drugs who ever said, by the way, there are animal studies showing we're going to permanently change a child's biochemistry with these drugs, or, hey, we have some studies of children that show that they're going to be more cocaine abuse prone when they get into their early adulthood. They'll miss their ADHD drugs and they'll take cocaine instead. Or, your child is going to be smaller than God or evolution planned. Or we don't know what in the world's going on here, but think about the fact that we get fetal abnormalities from these drugs, that the newborn baby goes in withdrawal. So God knows what it's doing during this vital time when your child's brain is growing outside the mom, And you still got that same brain that's so sensitive to drugs. So what's the equivalent of fetal abnormalities? What are we doing with the child? So, no, these questions are just glossed over, and we get these stupid remarks from where? The New York Times, people who should know better, that, quote, drastically improve the lives of those with ADHD. Maybe one of their kids is quieter and less troublesome now. Who knows where they got that idea from?
Thanks to everybody who shops at Amazon.com. I wanted to mention that LRC gets a small commission at no cost to the buyer every time you go to Amazon through an LRC link, any of the widgets on the page for books or other items, or entering through the ad at the top left-hand corner of the front page. So thanks again, and it's a huge help. And Amazon, what a great company. It's just extraordinary. You don't need to go down to the local bricks and mortar place. You don't have to pay, in many cases anyway, sales taxes. So far as I can tell, virtually everything the human race produces is for sale at Amazon.com. So I highly recommend it. It helps keep LRC alive and growing. So thanks to all of you who shop at Amazon. I remember seeing some years ago a full-page ad in the Times, and maybe it was 2 pages of ads, one with a little tiny type and the other the part of the ad intended to sell a drug. And it was, hey, great news, now we have Adderall for adults. So all you adults who have the following symptoms should be going on these drugs too. So it's not just children, is it?
No, it's the adults. And what you're finding, of course, more and more is that children and adults are taking it on their own as a performance-enhancing drug. And there was a recent article in a neurology journal complaining about this, that you shouldn't, just because the kid wants better grades or wants to do better in sports, you shouldn't give him the drug. But how is that different than giving the drug to make them sit down and shut up? Better, quote, behavior through chemistry. It's a widespread use. And the reason why people think the drug helps, why the college student or the kid might think the drug is helping, is that these drugs, one of their serious adverse effects is over-focusing, obsessive focusing. So what happens is that because it's limiting your spontaneity, it's limiting your fantasy life, it's limiting your daydreaming, it's limiting your desire for social relationship, it's really compressing your brain. Because it's doing that, if you're, say, a college kid and you take one dose, it starts with the first dose, so you have the sense of, boy, I'm just hitting these books all night long, plus it's going to cause insomnia. So here I am, boy, obsessively and not sleeping and studying all night long. Wow, this must be great. But obsessive focusing does not produce learning. There's no evidence that it even improves temporary performance on the test the next morning. I mean, there's no evidence for that. The evidence is solely that it causes this kind of obsessive focus with a limited brain function. But to the individual, it may feel like he's doing better, but he has no idea whether he would have done better if he hadn't studied at all and just had a good night's sleep, or maybe tried to study for a couple of hours. It's a very sad situation, and it's saying something terrible about how we are teaching our children to think of themselves. It's part and parcel of a subject so large that one person can't grasp it. I really genuinely believe, I, as one person, can't grasp the size of this problem. I mean, it fits into the whole thing in schools now, where the teachers are teaching to the tests instead of teaching information and knowledge and, God forbid, wisdom. Worse than that, even morality, God forbid. that we're teaching them the things that matter in life. We're teaching them for the test, and the teacher's futures depend on teaching to the test in some cases, or the school's future in terms of funding depend on it. And the kid getting eventually into college depends on the test scores over the years. So why not then cheat, like a lot of teachers now and administrators being caught cheating just to raise these test scores? And why not take drugs? And why not even encourage kids to take drugs in the hope, I think it's a vain hope, but in the hope that obsessive focusing and staying up all night will help them the following day on the test. So it's a part of a huge picture of not treating our children as moral beings, as self-determined beings. If you look at what is the main job of a parent and teacher? Well, one main job is to teach self-discipline to a child, to encourage and provide the opportunity and the model for self-discipline. And instead, we're teaching some of our best and brightest kids, right now 20% of the boys at 14 to 17, that they're not autonomous, that they don't have choice, that they don't have self-discipline, that they have broken brains, and the best thing to do is take a drug and get on with your life. And another key that we want to teach children is morality, which is closely tied to autonomy, growth, and growth as a prematuring. And we're telling the kids there's no morality about life. It's about getting ahead and conforming. Oh, so much about conforming, which is much easier to do on the drugs. On any drug, it's much easier to suppress yourself and conform. So it's really overall just a drastic situation.
And, Peter, as I look back at all the various government medical programs over the years, and we can talk about them all, but just to say Medicare Part D was written by the insurance companies and by the pharmaceutical industry. And as far as I can tell, that's true of Obamacare, too. So are we facing now outside of, of course, the Medicare Part D for people over 65. So for the rest of the population, are we going to face much more intense pressure to see the doctor for 5 minutes and get 7 prescriptions, some of which will be psychiatric prescriptions?
Yeah. In every country that has some form of socialized medicine or national health care, services like family therapy, therapy for children, which I think should always be family therapies, basically, they're non-existent, or you pay for them yourself and you still have trouble finding them. So healthcare systems tend to go for the mythological efficiency of psychiatric drugs. And I believe it is mythological because no one ever counts huge number of psychiatric hospitalizations caused by drugs, or the huge number of patients on disability that's caused by these drugs. And again, I review these issues in psychiatric drug withdrawal, so you can get references and citations. So the costs in terms of disability, in terms of hospitalization, in terms of long-term treating of multiple psychiatric problems is just a tragedy. And I see it personally in my practice where, say, a 25-year-old comes in with his parents. He's been on psychiatric drugs since he was anywhere between 3 and 10. And he's now 24, so he's been on these drugs for more than a decade. And one started with Ritalin because school recommended it, or because the parents were having trouble disciplining, because they never learned how to discipline well. Their own problems were getting in the way. But it starts with something really simple. It could have been easily handleable by a healthcare intervention that said, hey, let's work on teaching your child discipline and autonomy. And which there are many good approaches. And now I see the young man at age 24, and it's clear that he's got all kinds of skills, maybe music, maybe art, maybe math, maybe science, maybe literature, but he's virtually disabled and living at home. And he's on disability. And I'm unable to, even with all my knowledge and experience, I'm unable to get him off all his psychiatric drugs. Maybe I can reduce his meds a little, because as we start to withdraw, his poor brain, which has been so soaked in these drugs, unmasks how injured it is, and it's unbearable to him to see it, to feel it. And he starts to get anxious and frightened, and since he's now had multiple hospitalizations and there are horror stories in the family, the parents freak out. Oh my God, he's going to get violent again, or he's going to get suicidal again. And even though they know that a lot of it has to do with the drugs, and they brought him to me to help get off the drugs, They're too frightened. And it's very, very hard to get a hospital, almost impossible, just about impossible to get a psychiatric hospital to admit that this problem even exists. So you can't admit him to a hospital so he can safely withdraw from the drugs. I had an 8-year-old child with tardive dyskinesia and severe withdrawal problems from coming off of an antipsychotic drug, 8 years old. And I couldn't get him off because every time I got near to being off the drugs, he would get so disturbed and out of control and violent. And finally, fortunately, the nurse practitioner who was acting as his pediatrician really agreed with me, and we managed to convince a university medical center a couple hours away to take him for drug withdrawal because he had tardive dyskinesia. And that was a miracle, and the center behaved very admirably. They worked with me totally, sent him home on the most minuscule amount of medication, which is, he can be withdrawn from. But that's rare. And we had to go through such contortions. I think the nurse practitioner contacted 10 or 15 facilities. No one would consider taking an 8-year-old with multiple psychiatric drugs in a hospital setting for his own good. It's a terrible situation out there, and very, very bad.
Well, Doctor, thanks for all you do to help rescue these kids and help teach parents what to do. And I'm so glad you mentioned your conference. But before we go, I want to ask you about psychiatric drugs and mass murder. I noticed that both in the Newtown, Connecticut case and the Aurora, Colorado case, that psychiatric records and records of what sort of drugs and what dosages and for how long and so forth these guys were on are like state secrets. They're not to be revealed under any circumstances. And I guess it's just another indication of how tight the pharmaceutical industry and the psychiatric profession are with the government.
I'm so glad you brought it up. I'm so glad that you used that language, state secrets, because of great interest to me, they're beyond state secrets. They're some sort of super secret that is very hard to even figure out. So, for example, I have literally gotten calls from people in state legislatures where I can't tell you any more specific than that, where some of these mass murders have been committed, and they want to know if I can get the data. Peter Breggin has everything. If I can get the data, because they can't, even being members of state legislatures. And I've got at least 2 calls like this. And then if you look at the report, for example, that came out of the shootings in Virginia, at the Virginia Tech, is this great big study, and it's vague on this. It doesn't come to some conclusion about the drugs. One very, very, do I have about 3 or 4 minutes?
Sure, of course. So you have all the time you want.
Right after the shooting, I call it the truth serum of the shooting. Right after the Connecticut shootings, 2 of the biggest talking heads in America, the most knowledgeable talking heads in America and respected, came out and said we have to look for the role of drugs in the Newtown shootings because we now know that drugs can do this. The person who said we now know that drugs can do this was Sanjay Gupta on CNN. And he talked about this for 7 or 8 minutes, some sort of considerable time. And the other person who talked about it was Tom Ridge. And he said that there were evaluations showing that the shooter in Columbine, Eric Harris, was influenced by psychiatric drugs. The only real evaluation I know of that is me in my scientific articles and in my book, Reclaiming Our Children, where I talk about that. Because I know for sure, I was an expert in cases surrounding Columbine. I know for sure that Eric Harris was taking Luvox and that there was a substantial amount in his bloodstream at the time of his death from autopsy. I've documented that. So if you go to my website too and look up the shootings on the website, you'll see a couple of headings that refer to psychiatry and the shootings, or go on to YouTube. I managed to capture, I just was watching a lot of TV at the time trying to see what was going on. I managed to capture Sanjay Gupta's comments, and I managed to capture Tom Ridge's comments talking about the risk of psychiatric drugs and violence. And I put them up on YouTube, and I put them up also linked to them from from one of my blogs on Sanjay Gupta and Tom Ridge, which you can find on my website. Looking at my blogs, I have a separate section of blogs that I did on these issues, and the blogs appear in various places, but I got them put together. So you can actually go and see Tom Ridge saying this, and you can see Sanjay Gupta. And I say it's the truth serum of the day or two after these horrific things that these guys who are so respected and so in on the know came out with this, because you never hear it again. It never comes up again, as far as I know, on CNN or on Fox. Tom Ridge was on Fox, and Gupta was on CNN. So there's this kind of secrecy cloak that as soon as these guys spoke out, God knows who called them. But somebody told them, shut up about this stuff. So these are super secrets. These aren't even state secrets. And another part of it that's so striking, when I wrote Talking Back to Prozac, 1994, I could cite dozens and dozens of newspaper reports about violence, suicide, and weird crimes where the reports would say the person was taking Prozac. That was just one drug then, Prozac. Now, you're not going to see hardly any newspaper reports that link bizarre behaviors, violent behaviors, car crashes, or anything else to the far greater numbers now of antidepressant drugs that cause these things. So again, it's not just a state secret, it's a super secret. And the power of the drug companies and organized psychiatry and medicine to have accomplished this shutdown while simultaneously convincing America that they have biochemical imbalances that are being helped by these drugs, well, that's all over the place. Well, the damage is never mentioned. It's quite a remarkable thing, and I don't even know how it's been accomplished.
It's an astounding thing. I mean, right now the judge in Colorado is threatening a Fox reporter with jail because she won't reveal how she knew that there was a psychiatric notebook on the Aurora shooter with all kinds of stuff about dosages and treatment and so forth. And it was supposed to be secret that such a thing existed. And the fact that she reported it, he's demanding to know who told, who leaked this, and he's wanting to put her in jail if she doesn't go along. So just the existence of psychiatric notes on this guy is another one of these super secrets.
Wow. This show is inspiring me. I should do a blog on super secrets.
Yeah, wonderful. Sure should. And
the mystery of super secrets in psychiatry.
Peter, thanks so much for spending all this time with us today. And
thank you.
It's an honor to have you on. You're doing such important work. Every parent has to be grateful to you, and keep it up.
Thanks a lot, and I love being on your show. So it's a privilege to be on your show.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.